The wind howled like an uninvited guest, tearing through the empty streets of a forgotten town. It was the kind of day where the world felt damp and cold, where every drop of rain felt like a whispered message from a place no one wanted to hear. Beneath the shadows of a crumbling fence, a small, trembling figure lay curled in the dirt. A puppy, barely more than skin and bones, its fur matted and soaked, clung to its frail frame. Its tiny legs, twisted and broken, looked as if they had been abandoned for far too long. Through the pouring rain, a figure appeared on the horizon. A woman, soaked to the bone but moving with purpose. Her boots splashed in the water, each step a drumbeat of resolve. She had heard about the pup, had been told it was too far gone, but something inside her refused to let go. The puppy was forgotten, lost in a place where only the desperate came, yet she had arrived. She kneeled down in front of the puppy, feeling the cold, wet fur beneath her hands, hearing the soft whimper of pain. But she didn't back away. She felt its heartbeat, a fragile, trembling pulse, and for the first time in days, the puppy looked up at her, trusting, even for a second. There was no turning back. In this broken moment, a decision had been made. The puppy would live, no matter the cost. Show your love, hit like, share, and subscribe for more. The rain hit the streets in cold, unrelenting sheets, as though the sky itself was mourning the world below. The city, once full of life, now seemed abandoned, its streets flooded with murky water, its buildings draped in a gray fog that refused to lift. The air smelled of damp earth and rusting metal, a reminder of how time had eroded both the physical and emotional fabric of the place. It was the kind of day that weighed heavy on the soul. The kind of day when you could feel the sadness in the very air, pressing down on your chest until you could hardly breathe. Her boots splashed in the rising water as she walked, each step heavy with purpose. She had been given the address by a stranger, someone who had heard about the pup. A small, broken creature, left in a corner of a forgotten street, forgotten by everyone except the few who still cared to notice. She wasn't sure why she cared. She wasn't sure why it felt like she had to be the one to save it. But the moment the words, "broken puppy," had reached her ears, it was as if something inside her had clicked. She couldn't leave it behind. Her coat was soaked through, water running down her sleeves and pooling at her feet. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The puppy was somewhere out there, waiting to be saved, waiting for a hand to lift it from the muck. The city had been a place of dreams once. But now, it felt like a place where things went to disappear, forgotten, left to decay until no one even remembered they had existed in the first place. People didn't talk about the abandoned dog at the end of the street, the one that was just a shadow in the corner of someone's memory. Yet, here she was, drawn to it as if something deep inside had whispered to her to go. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Turning the corner, she saw the familiar sight, the abandoned lot, its walls crumbling and covered in graffiti, the smell of rotting wood and rust hanging thick in the air. There, beneath a broken fence, was the small, fragile body of the puppy. Its fur was caked in dirt and wet from the relentless rain. It barely moved as she approached, its tiny chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Her heart sank as she took in the sight. The puppy was no more than a skeleton draped in skin. Its legs were twisted in unnatural ways, each bone jutting out at awkward angles, as though they had been broken and left to heal without care. There was no hope in its eyes. Just a dull, lifeless stare that seemed to look through her. It was as though it had given up on the world altogether. She took a step forward, her hand trembling as she reached out toward it. The puppy flinched, a low whimper escaping its cracked lips, but it didn't move away. It just lay there, trapped in its own pain and confusion. She could see its ribs clearly, the bones pressing against the thin fur. She swallowed hard, fighting the wave of emotion that threatened to rise. She couldn't just leave it here. She couldn't walk away and pretend she hadn't seen this. There was no going back. Slowly, she crouched down, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. She knew better than to startle it further. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her hands shaking as she gently reached for the puppy. She had to be careful. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a life in her hands, fragile and on the verge of slipping away. Her fingers brushed against its fur, and for the first time, the puppy's eyes locked onto hers. There was no fear in its gaze now. Just a quiet recognition, a flicker of something that made her heart ache. It was as if, in that moment, the puppy knew she was there to help. She gently scooped it up, cradling its fragile body in her arms, feeling the weight of its brokenness pressing against her chest. It was cold, far colder than it should have been. It shivered in her arms, but it didn't struggle, didn't fight. It just lay there, exhausted and defeated, as if it had given up on fighting for its life. "Don't worry," she whispered softly, as if the puppy could understand. "You're not alone anymore. I won't leave you, I promise." She stood up, her legs wobbly beneath her as the weight of the puppy seemed to pull her down. She glanced around, the rain still coming down in torrents. The world felt distant, muted, like a bad dream. She had come here to save a life, but in doing so, she felt like she was holding on to something much bigger. The responsibility was immense, too much for just one person, and yet here she was, holding this tiny, broken creature that needed her. As she made her way back down the street, each step seemed to echo in the emptiness. The puppy's soft whimper filled the air. But it wasn't the desperate cry it had been moments before. It was quieter now, more resigned. It was as if the puppy was already beginning to trust her, already beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't have to suffer alone anymore. The world outside continued to flood, but in that moment, all she could focus on was the small body in her arms. She could feel its heartbeat, rapid and uneven, beneath her fingertips. She could feel the life still there, fragile as it was. She couldn't let it slip away. Not yet. Not while she was still breathing. She wasn't sure what the future held, or if the puppy would even survive the night. But she knew one thing: she had made a choice. And that choice was to do everything in her power to give this small creature a chance at life. The streets were empty, the world around her silent except for the sound of the rain. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't alone. The puppy, despite everything, was still holding on. And so she would too. The clinic was a sterile, silent place, but to her it felt more like a sanctuary than a hospital. The puppy, still cradled in her arms, seemed so small in the face of its surroundings. The cold metal tables, the hum of fluorescent lights above, everything felt distant. Too distant for a creature so fragile. She felt the weight of the puppy's brokenness more here than anywhere else. It wasn't just the physical wounds that were evident now. It was the unseen ones, the ones buried deep, the ones she couldn't fix with a bandage or medication. She had arrived just in time, or so the vet had said, but the puppy was far from out of danger. She was still grasping at hope like a lifeline, but as the doctor worked, examining its twisted legs and frail frame, the truth settled in. The damage was severe. The puppy's small body had been battered by something more than just neglect. It had been abandoned in the worst way, left to suffer alone without care. The woman's heart tightened with each soft whimper the puppy made. The vet's voice was steady, but the words hit her like a weight. "We'll need to set its legs. There's some internal damage as well, bruising, swelling. If it wasn't for the fact that it's so young, we might have been too late." Her breath caught in her throat, but she kept her composure. "What about the pain?" she asked, her voice tight, betraying the fear bubbling inside. "We'll manage it. It's just a matter of time. But we need to act fast." She nodded, but it felt like the room was closing in on her. Time, that precious thing, was slipping through her fingers. She hadn't prepared for this, hadn't expected it to be so difficult. She had seen pain before, felt it herself, in her own life. But seeing it in those eyes, those trusting eyes that had looked to her for help, was something else entirely. As the vet moved the puppy onto the table, she stepped back, her hands instinctively going to her chest. She could still feel the heat of its tiny body against her skin, still hear the weak, labored breaths it took in her arms. The puppy's legs were bandaged, but the limpness of its small frame made it seem more like a fragile doll than a living creature. "I'll stay here with it," she said, her voice firm. The vet nodded but didn't protest. She wasn't about to leave the puppy now. Hours passed in a blur of antiseptic smells, gentle beeps from the monitors, and the soft whimpering of the puppy. The vet had assured her that it would survive the night, but the woman wasn't so sure. There was something about the way it looked at her, like it wasn't just fighting for its life, but fighting against something far deeper than injury. Fear, loneliness, desperation. She could see it in the way it curled into itself, trying to find comfort, and yet pulling away from any attempt to soothe it. She sat by the puppy's side, her hand resting on its fragile body. The feel of its ribcage rising and falling in shallow breaths was a constant reminder that this was not a small thing. She wasn't just caring for a wounded animal, she was caring for something broken in ways she couldn't fully understand. Her mind drifted, as it often did when she had time to think. Her own wounds, though not physical, were still there. She'd come to this city looking for something, though she wasn't sure what. Maybe peace, maybe a purpose. But now, as she sat by the puppy, she wondered if this was the reason she had come: to heal, to fix, to be the one who gave something a second chance. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, but she didn't pick it up. There was nothing important enough to distract her now. Not when the puppy was lying there fragile and weak. It needed her. This was more than a mission. This was more than responsibility. It was about the puppy's life, and somehow it was about her own, too. The night dragged on, and the puppy's condition remained unchanged. She kept her hand on its side, feeling the slow rhythm of its breathing. She had no idea how much longer she could keep this up. The exhaustion from the day was starting to creep in, but she pushed it away. There was no time for rest, no time for her own weakness. When the vet came back in, he checked the puppy's vitals once more, nodding in approval at its progress. Though it was still far from being out of the woods, "It's holding on," he said, but there was no joy in his voice. "We need to monitor it through the night. Just make sure it stays warm and comfortable." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the puppy. It was then that she realized she wasn't just watching over it. She was bonding with it in a way that she couldn't explain. The puppy, so broken and lost, was looking to her for something. For care, for protection, for life. And in that moment, she realized she was offering all of that. She was no longer just the stranger who found it in the rain. She was something else to this puppy, something it needed to survive. As the vet left, she settled into the chair beside the table, her eyes never leaving the small body in front of her. The puppy's chest rose and fell in slow, labored breaths, and the woman felt a quiet sense of connection, of solidarity. Despite the pain, despite the damage, there was life in it. And that somehow was enough. It was all they had. She whispered softly, "You're not alone, little one. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." And with that, she closed her eyes, knowing that whatever happened, she would be there. She wouldn't let it go. She couldn't. The days blurred into one another like the gray clouds that hung overhead, never seeming to part. The puppy, though small and fragile, had begun to show subtle signs of progress. The woman had stayed by its side every moment, through the cold hospital nights and the sterile days that passed in what felt like slow motion. The vet had cautioned her. It's a slow process. Don't expect miracles. But with each passing day, she clung to the flicker of life she saw in the puppy's eyes. The way it now wagged its tail weakly when she walked into the room. The way it nuzzled her hand as if trying to tell her it trusted her. There were moments, like when she was feeding it, that she saw a spark of hope in its eyes. Despite the pain, despite the scars it carried, the puppy was fighting, and in a strange way so was she. She had always believed that the strength of an animal's spirit could be stronger than the physical wounds it carried. But seeing it firsthand, witnessing the puppy, so broken yet so determined to survive, it made her feel something stir inside herself. There were difficult days, moments when she'd hear the soft cries of the puppy as it struggled to adjust to the pain in its body. The vet had explained that recovery would be slow, that there were no guarantees. "We'll just have to take it day by day," he had said, his voice a mix of encouragement and practicality. "You've done well to get it this far." The puppy's body was still fragile, its small bones still mending from the breaks, and the bruising was still evident on its once pale skin. But it had begun to eat more consistently, and with each meal she could see its strength returning. Its fur, matted and grimy when she first found it, was starting to glisten once more. It wasn't much, but it was a victory, the first true sign that the puppy could make it through this. But the physical healing was only part of the journey. It wasn't just about the puppy's broken bones or its raw, battered skin. The deeper wounds were the ones she couldn't see, the ones she couldn't touch. She could feel the puppy's reluctance, its hesitation to trust, to love again. The fear that lingered in its eyes wasn't just from physical pain. It was the terror of abandonment, of being left alone once more in a world that had turned its back. It was in those moments that the woman realized how much they shared. She had been left behind too, in her own way. She understood the feeling of being broken, not physically, but emotionally. There was a time in her life when she had felt as fragile as this puppy, when she had lost all hope of finding love or trust, or even a sense of belonging. The puppy wasn't just a lost soul to be rescued, it was a mirror to her own pain, her own journey of healing. One morning, after several quiet days of watching the puppy slowly regain strength, something unexpected happened. As she reached down to lift the puppy out of its bed, her hand brushed against its side, and for the first time, the puppy didn't flinch. It turned its head, looking up at her with those large, brown eyes. And in that moment, it did something that felt like a miracle. It licked her hand. Just a soft, tentative touch, but it was enough to send a rush of warmth through her chest. Tears filled her eyes as she leaned down, her hand trembling as she gently stroked the puppy's fur. The room, once filled with the sounds of beeping machines and quiet whispers, now felt alive with a quiet, powerful energy. The puppy wasn't just surviving anymore. It was beginning to trust. It was beginning to understand that it was safe. And with that trust, something began to shift inside her, too. She had been afraid. Afraid of getting too attached. Afraid of the heartbreak that could come if the puppy didn't make it. But in this moment, she realized something. Love didn't come with guarantees. It never did. But it was worth the risk. The vet was optimistic when he checked in that afternoon. The puppy had gained weight. Its wounds were healing, and the bruising had faded. "It's still a long road," he said, but there was a smile on his face now, one that hadn't been there when he first saw the puppy. "You've done something remarkable here. You've given it a fighting chance." Her heart swelled with pride, but it was more than that. The puppy wasn't just a project. It wasn't just a broken animal to be fixed. It had become a symbol of everything she had been through, of everything she had lost and found. The hours in the clinic passed with the steady rhythm of her thoughts, each day blending into the next. But one morning, as she sat beside the puppy, feeding it small bites of soft food, she saw it. The first real sign of life. The puppy stood up on its own, its tiny legs shaky but determined. It wobbled on its feet, then took a hesitant step forward, and then another. It was slow, awkward, but it was movement. It was progress. She held her breath as the puppy took a few more steps, its small tail wagging weakly behind it. And then, without thinking, she leaned forward and whispered, "Good job, little one." The puppy paused, looking back at her with those wide, trusting eyes. And for a brief, beautiful moment, they both understood. This was it. This was the turning point. It wasn't just the puppy that was healing. It was her, too. The walls she had built around herself, the ones that kept her from truly caring about anything or anyone, had begun to crumble. Slowly, piece by piece, the trust that she had thought lost forever was coming back. She wasn't just rescuing the puppy. The puppy was rescuing her. As the puppy walked a few more steps, and then another, she felt a lump rise in her throat. It was a bittersweet moment, because she knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The puppy had started walking, but they both had a long way to go. But for the first time since she had found the puppy, she allowed herself to believe it. That hope was possible. That healing was possible. Not just for the puppy, but for herself. And in that moment, she realized that the puppy wasn't just giving her a reason to continue. It was teaching her what it meant to live again. The mornings had started to feel warmer, the air thicker with the promise of spring. But inside the small room of the clinic, the quiet hum of machinery and the soft sighs of the puppy filled the space, grounding the woman in the present. She had spent every waking moment watching the puppy's slow but steady recovery, a process that felt both miraculous and fragile. It wasn't easy. Each step the puppy took toward recovery felt like a battle, and every setback seemed to pull them both back into the darkness of what had been. Today, though, felt different. The puppy had been standing more often, wobbling on its broken legs, its muscles weak but slowly growing stronger. The vet had encouraged the woman to start giving it more freedom, to allow it to stretch its legs and explore the small space of the clinic. But there was hesitation in the air, the kind that was almost palpable. The puppy's fragile body was healing, but its mind, its heart, still bore the deep scars of abandonment. It was a test, she realized, not just for the puppy but for herself too. She had been its protector, its constant. But now, it needed to learn how to trust again. It needed to learn how to live again, outside of the fear and pain it had once known. She sat on the floor beside the puppy's bed, watching it slowly turn its head toward her, its eyes filled with a strange mixture of uncertainty and hope. The silence stretched between them like a bridge, both of them standing on either side, afraid to take that first step toward each other. For a moment, she felt a pang of doubt. Was it too soon? Was the puppy ready? She had been so cautious, so protective, not wanting to push it too far, too fast. She couldn't bear the thought of it slipping backward, of the trauma taking hold once more. But then she saw it, a flicker of movement in the puppy's small body. It wasn't much, just a slight shift, but it was enough. The puppy was moving toward her. Slowly, uncertainly, but moving nonetheless. The woman's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She held her breath as the puppy hesitated, its eyes locked on hers, as though searching for reassurance. She didn't speak, didn't make a sound. She simply extended her hand, palm up, waiting for it to decide. The puppy took a cautious step forward, its legs trembling beneath it, but it didn't pull away. The woman's chest tightened as she watched it move toward her, each small step a victory. There were no words to say, no reassurance that could truly make a difference. All she could offer was her presence, her trust that it was safe to take this step, that it wasn't alone anymore. The puppy's head lowered as it sniffed the ground, inching closer until its tiny nose brushed against her fingertips. Her heart soared as she gently stroked its fur, the softness of it reminding her of just how far they had come. It was tentative, like a child unsure of the world, but it was enough. For a few moments, the room felt still, like the world outside had ceased to exist. The woman and the puppy were in this shared moment, their connection growing with each breath. There was so much unspoken between them, so much fear and hope and raw emotion that neither knew how to put into words. But in that silence, they both understood one thing: they were no longer strangers. They had become each other's refuge. The puppy lifted its head slightly, its eyes meeting hers with a softness that hadn't been there before. The woman smiled, her lips trembling as she let her hand gently rest on its back. It was a simple touch, but it carried a depth of emotion that words could never express. She had watched this little creature struggle, fight, and stumble its way through pain. And now, here it was, reaching out to her in its own quiet way. But it wasn't just the puppy who was learning to trust. She was, too. The woman had come to the clinic expecting to help the puppy, expecting to heal the broken creature before her. But what she hadn't expected was that this journey would teach her something about herself. She had closed herself off for so long, building walls around her heart to protect it from the pain of loss and disappointment. She had kept her distance, afraid of getting too close, afraid of the heartache that could follow if things didn't go as planned. But with the puppy, she had no choice but to open herself up, to show it that it was worth the risk, to show it that, even in the face of uncertainty, there was still room for love. The puppy nudged its nose against her hand, a soft, tentative gesture that was both a request for comfort and a symbol of trust. She took a deep breath, her heart swelling with emotion as she looked at the small creature before her. She had come to this moment with fear, with doubt, but she had stayed. And now, the puppy was staying too. There was a moment, a fleeting second, when the puppy's entire body relaxed. The tension that had coiled in its limbs seemed to ease, and its tail gave a small, shaky wag. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her eyes well up. It was a sign of progress, a sign that the puppy had started to believe in the world again, that it had started to believe in her. The woman reached for it, her hands trembling with emotion, and pulled the puppy close. It was a quiet, intimate moment, one that neither of them had asked for but both needed. She rested her cheek against its soft fur, feeling the warmth of its body against hers. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel so alone. They were healing together. The days had turned warmer, and the air, once thick with the weight of winter, now carried the first whispers of spring. The clinic's small, sterile room had been transformed in the woman's eyes. No longer just a place of pain and recovery. It had become a sanctuary. She had come to understand that healing, much like trust, was a gradual process. It wasn't linear and it wasn't predictable. But as the days stretched on, she began to see the changes in the puppy that made her heart swell with pride and hope. The puppy, once trembling and broken, had begun to thrive. It had started walking more confidently, taking each step with more certainty. The tiny legs, once so fragile and unsteady, were gaining strength, and with each step, the puppy was reclaiming more than just its body. It was reclaiming its life. The woman couldn't help but smile as she watched the puppy's progress. The soft, tentative wobbles had turned into small, joyful trots. The puppy's tail, once barely a flicker of movement, was now wagging with the innocence and enthusiasm of a creature rediscovering the world. It was as if the puppy had forgotten what it felt like to move, to run, and now that it was experiencing it again, it couldn't stop. But it wasn't just the puppy that was changing. The woman, too, was healing. She had given so much of herself to this small, broken creature, and in return, it had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing, a sense of purpose, of connection. She had spent so long protecting herself from pain, closing off her heart to keep it safe. But the puppy had broken down the walls she'd so carefully built. She had learned that healing wasn't just about fixing broken things. It was about growing, about allowing yourself to feel, even the vulnerability that came with love. The moment that the puppy took its first real run across the clinic floor, its legs moving with newfound strength and purpose, the woman's heart soared. She couldn't contain the tears that welled up in her eyes. She had been there through the worst of it, holding the puppy when it was nothing but bones and fear, watching as it fought to stay alive. And now here it was running, thriving, a symbol of resilience. The puppy's joy was infectious. As it sprinted in circles, tail wagging furiously, the woman laughed through her tears. She clapped her hands, urging the puppy to run faster, to play as though it had never known pain. The puppy's eyes sparkled with life, and it responded to her, its little body moving faster, leaping through the air with unbridled energy. It was a beautiful sight, one that made her heart swell with a sense of pride that she hadn't felt in a long time. But even as the puppy began to heal physically, the woman knew there was still work to be done. Trust, once broken, didn't return all at once. There were still moments when the puppy flinched at sudden movements, when it would curl up in fear if she reached for it too quickly. But those moments were growing fewer, and the bond between them was strengthening every day. That afternoon, the vet came in to check on the puppy, a look of surprise crossing his face as he watched it run around the room. "Well, this is a pleasant surprise," he said with a chuckle, watching as the puppy skidded to a stop at the woman's feet, looking up at her with shining eyes. The woman smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "It's been a long road," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I think we're finally getting there." The vet nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "You've done a remarkable job. Not just physically, but emotionally too. This puppy would have never made it without you." Her heart ached at his words, but there was also a sense of peace. She had been afraid that she wouldn't be enough, that she wouldn't know how to help the puppy, or worse, that she'd fail. But now, with the puppy bounding around the room, its once broken legs strong and sure, she knew that it had made it. They had made it, together. The puppy turned and trotted over to her, nuzzling her hand as if to remind her that it was still there, still needing her. She bent down to scoop it up, feeling the warmth of its body against hers, its tiny heart still beating strongly. "We're a team, aren't we?" she whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of its head. As the puppy snuggled into her arms, she realized something profound. This wasn't just about saving a life, this was about healing, about giving something a chance to grow, to trust, to become something whole again. She had started this journey to help the puppy, but somewhere along the way it had helped her too. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden light into the room. The soft glow bathed them both in warmth, the shadows stretching long across the floor. The woman sat back in the chair. The puppy nestled contentedly in her lap, and she felt a quiet sense of gratitude. The storm that had begun all those days ago, the one that had brought her here, to this broken puppy, had passed. The clouds were starting to part, and she could see the possibility of a new day on the horizon. She looked down at the puppy, its eyes soft with trust and affection. They had both come so far. The road ahead was still long, but the woman felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in new beginnings. And with that belief, she knew that the future was bright, not just for the puppy but for herself too. The mornings had grown warmer, but the unease that the woman had been carrying, the weight of doubt, still lingered like a shadow that refused to leave. The puppy had made incredible progress, its small body now strong and capable, its eyes full of life and hope. But in the quiet moments when she was alone with it, she couldn't shake the fear that still clung to her. What if this was all temporary? What if the puppy, despite all the progress it had made, would never fully recover from the trauma it had suffered? What if the same dark past that had scarred it had also scarred her in ways she hadn't fully realized? She watched the puppy play, its small paws tapping against the floor as it raced around the room, its tail wagging furiously. It seemed so happy now, so free. But in the silence of the clinic's small room, her mind was filled with a constant hum of anxiety. She was afraid to get too comfortable. Afraid that if she let her guard down, she would lose everything she had fought so hard to protect. The fear wasn't just for the puppy, though. It was for herself, too. She had spent so much time protecting the puppy from harm, from the world's cruelty, that she hadn't realized how much she had been protecting herself. How much she had been keeping herself hidden behind walls of fear and doubt. The puppy's journey had been one of physical recovery, but for her, it felt like she was slowly unearthing a part of herself that she had buried for so long. She reached out to the puppy, her hand shaking as she gently stroked its soft fur. It was more than just the puppy's body that was healing. It was her own heart, too. And yet the fear still lingered. She couldn't shake it. The constant worry that somehow they wouldn't make it through, that the puppy's trust would falter, that the connection they had worked so hard to build would unravel. "Why am I still afraid?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights. The puppy turned its head toward her, its ears perking up as if it could sense the tension in her voice. It let out a soft whine, the sound tugging at her heart. She smiled weakly at it, trying to push the doubt aside. "I'm here," she whispered. "I won't let you go." But as the days went by, the weight of doubt only grew heavier. The more the puppy healed, the more she realized how much she had put into this journey. She wasn't just nursing a broken animal back to health. She was laying bare the pieces of herself that she had long forgotten. The walls she had built around her heart were crumbling, piece by piece, and with each crack, she felt more vulnerable, more exposed. What if she wasn't enough? What if the puppy still had more wounds, deeper ones, that she couldn't heal? What if the puppy grew strong again, but it never learned to trust fully, never learned to love freely? What if her heart, too, was too broken to heal? She had come so far, but she still had so much further to go. One afternoon, as the puppy played in the clinic's small yard, she sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the small creature running in the sunlight. It looked so free, so full of joy. Yet, even in its happiness, she saw the vulnerability in its eyes. There was still a trace of hesitation, still a distance that it kept between them. It was as though it knew that it was safe, but the scars from its past were deep, and they wouldn't be easily erased. The woman's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. The vet stepped inside, his gaze immediately landing on the puppy, who had stopped playing and was now sitting by the fence, its eyes fixed on the woman. "He's making great progress," the vet said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "I didn't expect to see him so active so soon." The woman nodded, but her heart was heavy. "It's hard to believe sometimes. He's doing so well, but I'm still scared." The vet looked at her, his eyes softening. "It's normal to feel that way. You've been through a lot with him, and that's not easy, but you're doing great. This puppy is stronger because of you." She swallowed, a lump rising in her throat. "What if I'm not enough? What if it's all just temporary?" The vet paused for a moment, then walked over to the woman, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's not about being enough. It's about being there. You're present, and that's the most important thing. The rest will follow." His words, simple yet profound, hung in the air between them, and for the first time in days, the weight of doubt seemed to lift, even if just a little. She wasn't sure if the fear would ever completely go away, but maybe it didn't have to. Maybe the doubt was part of the journey, part of the healing process, for both the puppy and herself. She looked at the puppy again, watching as it began to play once more, its movements more fluid, more confident. It was still hesitant, but it was learning. It was still growing, and so was she. The weather had warmed into the golden, quiet days of late spring, and with it came the soft murmur of new life. The world outside the clinic seemed to be awakening. The streets, once drenched in rain, were now filled with the sound of birdsong and distant laughter. It felt like the world was moving forward, but inside the woman still felt a quiet unrest. It was as though the calm in the air outside only served to highlight the storm that still churned in her heart. The puppy, however, had begun to flourish in ways she hadn't expected. Its small body, once frail and fragile, was growing stronger with each passing day. Its legs, once weak and brittle, now carried it confidently across the room. It had become playful again, darting around the space, chasing after small toys, its tiny paws kicking up dust in the sunlight. It had learned to trust her completely, following her every move with the curiosity of a child discovering the world for the first time. But as much as she wanted to celebrate the puppy's progress, she still struggled with a deep, nagging doubt that refused to let go. She couldn't ignore the scars, the unseen wounds, that lingered beneath the surface. Yes, the puppy had healed physically, but there were still those quiet moments when it would freeze, its eyes darting around the room as though searching for something or someone. The fear was still there, buried deep. It wasn't just the puppy's trauma that she was grappling with. It was her own. She had poured so much of herself into this rescue, into this puppy's survival, that she had started to wonder if she had forgotten to take care of herself in the process. She had given everything, expecting nothing in return. But there was a part of her, a part she hadn't wanted to acknowledge, that was afraid of what would happen when the puppy was fully healed. What would be left for her? What if, after everything, she still couldn't fill the empty spaces within her own heart? One afternoon, as she sat in the clinic's waiting area, her fingers nervously tracing the edges of the chair, the vet entered. He had a small, knowing smile on his face, a look that suggested he had been observing the puppy's recovery as closely as she had. The woman had become accustomed to his calm, steady presence, but today, there was something different in his gaze. "He's doing better than I expected," the vet said, watching the puppy play with a squeaky toy. "He's almost ready to be taken off the painkillers. And he's gaining weight, becoming more active." The woman nodded, but her chest tightened. "It's hard to believe it sometimes," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I still look at him, and I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong, that the damage won't go away." The vet turned to her, his expression softening. "It's normal to feel that way. You've been with him through the darkest moments. You've watched him at his lowest. It's hard not to worry that things might go wrong again. But what I see is a puppy who is thriving because of you." Her heart skipped at his words, the weight of them sinking deep into her chest. She had been so focused on the puppy's survival, on his recovery, that she had failed to see the real impact of what they had shared, the journey they had gone through together. "I just don't want to fail him," she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice raw. "I've invested so much of myself in him. I don't know what would happen if it all fell apart." The vet walked over to her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've already given him everything he needs. You've shown him love, patience, and care. That's what he needed the most. The rest is just a matter of time. He's healing because he trusts you. And that trust, that's the greatest gift you've given him." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in a long while, the woman allowed herself to take a deep breath. The vet was right. The puppy had begun to trust her, to lean on her for comfort and safety. She had already given him everything she had to give: love, support, and, most importantly, belief. She had been the one constant in his world, the one thing that he could rely on when everything else had failed him. She looked over at the puppy, who had now stopped playing and was sitting quietly by her feet, his tail thumping softly against the floor. It gazed up at her with a look of pure affection, its brown eyes wide and trusting. And in that moment, she realized something. The puppy's recovery wasn't just about the physical healing. It was about the bond they had formed, the trust they had built, and the love they shared. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was enough. A small, hesitant smile tugged at the corners of her lips as she reached down to stroke the puppy's fur. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing in contentment. She couldn't explain it, couldn't put it into words, but she felt it, the deep, unspoken connection between them. They had both come through so much, but in the end, they had found something that neither of them had expected: hope. The puppy shifted slightly and licked her hand, as if reminding her that they were in this together. She laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign to her after so many weeks of worry and doubt. But it was real, it was genuine, and it was a A sign that they were both healing, step by step, moment by moment. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She would be there, every step of the way for as long as the puppy needed her. And in return, he would be there for her, too. This was their journey now. A journey of healing, of trust, of love. And in that quiet moment, as the sun began to set and cast a warm glow over the clinic, she felt a flicker of hope, small but steady, begin to bloom in her heart. The clinic had always been a place of sterile lights and sterile air. A place where the noise of healing was drowned by the hum of machines and the soft footfalls of the staff moving through the space. But now the world outside seemed to beckon with more promise. The days had stretched into weeks, and the puppy, once a fragile wisp of pain and brokenness, was now a ball of energy and life. Its body, though scarred and small, had begun to take on a strength the woman had only dared to hope for. But as the puppy began to run, its legs firm beneath it, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still to come. Healing from physical injury was one thing, but learning to trust again, that was something else entirely. The puppy had become so strong, so full of life. But the remnants of its past, the invisible scars it carried, were still there. The fear, the hesitation, the moments of panic when something startled it, all of those things still lingered, hanging like a shadow in the corners of its eyes. The woman sat by the window, watching as the puppy bounded across the clinic floor, its legs moving in joyful, uneven strides. There was an eagerness to its movements now, an exuberance that hadn't been there before. But there was still that hesitation, that flicker of doubt in its eyes whenever it tried something new. When it approached the door, its tail tucked between its legs, the woman's heart caught in her chest. She knew that the puppy's greatest challenge would be stepping into the world outside. The world it had been abandoned in, the world that had caused it so much pain. She had prepared for this moment in some ways. She had watched it run and play, grow stronger and more confident each day. But the world outside was a much larger place, and she could feel the weight of the unknown pressing against them both. Would the puppy be ready? Was she ready? The door opened with a soft creak, and the woman stepped outside, glancing back to find the puppy standing just inside the threshold, its body tense. She didn't rush it. She didn't force it. She simply stood there, waiting. The sunlight streamed through the door, casting long shadows on the ground, and the breeze carried the faint scent of blooming flowers. The world seemed to pause in that moment, holding its breath. She knelt down slowly, her voice soft and soothing. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to be afraid. We're in this together." The puppy's eyes flicked to her, its ears perked up, and for a moment, it looked almost like it might turn back. The hesitation was palpable, the fear curling in the edges of its movements. But then, with a deep breath, it took a tentative step forward. And then another. The woman's breath caught in her throat as she watched the puppy, its small paws taking slow, careful steps onto the grass. The world was big and unfamiliar, but there was something else in the air now. The puppy's courage, the woman's quiet encouragement. With each step, the puppy's body grew more confident, its movements more fluid. The once fragile animal was now fully in motion, its tail wagging cautiously but steadily. The woman couldn't help but smile, her heart swelling with pride. There was still a long road ahead, still more to overcome, but in that moment, it felt like the puppy had taken the first real leap toward the life it deserved. And she had taken a leap too. A leap into the unknown, into a future she couldn't predict, but was now willing to face. It wasn't just the puppy that was learning to trust the world again. It was her too. She watched as the puppy continued forward, its small body growing steadier with each step. There was a slight wobble still, a hesitation in its movements, but there was something else, a quiet, undeniable strength that had blossomed in the weeks of care, of tenderness, of patience. The puppy was reclaiming its power, reclaiming its place in the world. It paused for a moment, looking up at her, as if to check that she was still there, still guiding it. And when she smiled and gave a soft nod, the puppy took another step, this time with more confidence. It moved further from the safety of the clinic, further from the walls that had protected it for so long. The world outside, vast and unknown, stretched out before it, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the puppy was no longer afraid to take it on. It had crossed a threshold. Her heart fluttered as she followed it slowly, watching as the puppy sniffed the air, its small body alive with curiosity. The fear was still there. She could see it in the way it moved cautiously. But it was no longer the dominant force. The curiosity, the drive to live, was slowly starting to take its place. And for the first time since the puppy had arrived in her life, the woman could breathe without the weight of worry pressing down on her chest. She had come so far with the puppy, and it had come so far with her. Their journey wasn't over, but the first leap had been made. The hardest part, the part where trust had to be rebuilt, where fear had to be faced, was behind them. There would be setbacks. There would be moments when the puppy would hesitate again, when the past would surface in the form of a fleeting glance or a tense moment. But they would face those moments together. They had already done the hardest part. They had learned to trust each other, to let go of the fear, and to take that first step into the unknown. The puppy took a final step toward the large open yard in front of the clinic. The sun shone brightly, casting golden light across the grass, and for the first time, the woman felt like they were walking into a new chapter. A chapter where both of them had the chance to grow, to heal, and to find a place in the world that wasn't defined by pain, but by the strength they had gained together. As the puppy paused, its tail wagging fiercely, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a victory for the puppy, it was a victory for her too. A victory over fear, over doubt, over the pain of the past. They were no longer bound by it, they were free. And for the first time she allowed herself to believe in that freedom, in the promise of what was yet to come. The days had stretched into a rhythm, a soft ebb and flow of healing and growth. The woman had become accustomed to the feel of the puppy's warmth against her legs as it curled up beside her at night, the rhythmic breathing of its chest rising and falling like a steady heartbeat. The puppy, now strong, was a far cry from the fragile creature that had first entered the clinic. The limp that had once accompanied its every step was now gone, replaced with a lively bounce and a joyful energy that filled the room. It had grown into its body, into its new life. But today was different. The woman could feel it in the air, a tension that had been building between them both. There was a sense of anticipation, an unspoken promise that today something would change. She could see it in the way the puppy's eyes shone with a fire she hadn't seen before. There was no more hesitating. It was as though the puppy had made a decision to finally run, to move forward without the weight of its past, to truly embrace its new beginning. It was early in the morning when she opened the door to the clinic's small yard, the world still cool with the remnants of night. The puppy stood beside her, its tail wagging softly, its body poised with readiness. The sunlight had just begun to touch the tops of the trees, casting a golden glow across the yard, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. The quiet before the storm of movement, of life. She bent down to the puppy, her hand resting on its back, feeling the steady pulse of its heart beneath her palm. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice thick with emotion. The puppy turned its head toward her, its eyes steady, almost as if it understood the weight of her words. There was no hesitation in its gaze now. There was no fear. There was only a calm certainty that matched her own. With a deep breath, the woman stood, her heart racing in her chest. She had been with this puppy from the beginning, through the pain, the uncertainty, the doubt. She had been the one to show it love, to give it the space to heal. And now she had to let it go, let it run, let it be free. She stepped back, her hands shaking with anticipation. "Go ahead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Without another moment of hesitation, the puppy took off, its legs moving in perfect rhythm, its body flowing with the grace of an animal reborn. It was no longer the fragile creature that had been carried into the clinic, trembling with fear. It was a new being, strong, confident, full of life. The puppy ran across the yard, its body almost weightless as it bounded with pure joy, its tail a blur of motion behind it. The woman watched, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and awe as she saw the full extent of what the puppy had become. It didn't stop at the edge of the yard. It ran faster now with a strength that took the woman's breath away. It was as if the world had opened up before it, and for the first time in its life, it was truly free. There were no memories of abandonment, no traces of the fear that had once held it back. There was only the pure exhilaration of movement, of life, of freedom. The woman stood at the edge of the yard, watching as the puppy ran. Her eyes filled with tears, but these were not tears of sadness or fear. These were tears of release, of letting go. She had held on for so long, afraid of losing this little creature, afraid of the inevitable heartbreak that would come with such a deep connection. But now, as she watched the puppy run, no longer broken, no longer afraid, she understood. This was the ultimate gift she could give it, the freedom to be who it was meant to be. The puppy turned back toward her, its body slowing as it trotted back in her direction, its head held high, its eyes sparkling with pure joy. It was no longer the same dog that had arrived in her arms all those weeks ago. It was whole now, in every way, and so was she. The puppy stopped in front of her, panting with excitement, its tail wagging furiously. She crouched down, reaching for it, and when their eyes met, she knew they had both come full circle. The puppy had taken its first real run, its first leap into the world without fear. And in that moment, the woman realized that she, too, had taken a leap into trusting that she had done everything she could, that she had given the puppy what it needed to heal, and in doing so, had healed herself. She scooped the puppy up into her arms, holding it close as she whispered, "You did it. We did it." The world around them seemed to pause in that moment. The soft rustle of the trees, the warmth of the sun, the stillness of the air. It was a quiet victory, one that didn't need to be celebrated with grand gestures or loud proclamations. It was a victory of healing, of trust, and of love. It was the moment that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The puppy, content and at peace, rested its head against her chest, its body calm in her arms. She held it for a few more moments, feeling its warmth, its heartbeat, feeling the bond between them unspoken but undeniable. This was their moment, the moment that would stay with them forever. And as the woman walked back toward the clinic with the puppy in her arms, she understood that, no matter what came next, they had both been reborn. Their journey was far from over, but they had made it through the hardest part. They had learned to trust each other, to heal each other, and to love. And in that love, they had found freedom, a freedom that would carry them both forward together, into whatever the future held. The clinic felt quieter now, somehow emptier, though the woman could never quite pinpoint why. Maybe it was because the once constant sound of the puppy's soft whimpers had been replaced by the gentle thrum of its happy panting. Or maybe it was because the weight she had carried for so long, the worry, the fear of the puppy's future, the doubt about her own, had finally begun to lift. She sat by the window, her eyes watching the puppy as it played in the yard, its tiny body darting through the grass with the same joy and excitement it had shown the first time it had taken a step. It had changed, not just in its physical recovery, but in something deeper, something that resonated in the way it now moved through the world. The puppy no longer hesitated at every noise, no longer flinched at sudden movements. It had grown confident in its body, in its world, in the people who cared for it. And in that same way the woman had changed too. She was no longer the person who had first found it, broken and trembling. She wasn't the person who had doubted whether she had the strength to face the future, unsure of whether she was enough. She was different now too, stronger, more opened. The walls she had built around her heart, the ones she had kept so carefully guarded, had come down brick by brick with every small act of care, every moment of shared vulnerability. The puppy, in its own way, had shown her that love wasn't something to be afraid of. That healing, while painful, was also beautiful. That letting go wasn't the same as losing, and in that knowledge she found a peace she hadn't known she could feel. The puppy, now fully recovered, was no longer the small, fragile creature that had been rescued from the streets. It was a vibrant little dog, full of life and energy, with a gleam in its eyes that showed just how far it had come. It didn't limp anymore, didn't cower at loud noises. It had learned to trust, to love, and to be loved. And it was ready for a new chapter, one where it would run freely, explore the world with the woman by its side, and discover what it meant to live fully. The woman stood up, her eyes never leaving the puppy as it bounded toward her. It was as if it knew she was watching, as if it had a sense of the connection between them, the bond they had formed over the weeks of care and tenderness. It stopped in front of her, panting happily, its tail wagging furiously. She smiled, her heart swelling as she bent down to stroke its head, feeling the softness of its fur beneath her fingers. "You've come so far," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "Why both have?" The puppy nuzzled her hand, its body warm and solid, a living testament to their journey together. She couldn't help but think back to the first time she had held it. So fragile, so broken. She had thought it was a lost cause, that it wouldn't make it. But now, looking at it, watching it run with joy and abandon, she knew that everything had been worth it. Every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every step they had taken together, it had been worth it. She straightened up, watching as the puppy darted off toward the yard, its small legs moving with a fluidity she had never imagined. It was no longer the animal that needed protection. It had become the animal that could protect, that could explore and live its life with confidence. And the woman too was learning to live again, to let go of the past, to embrace the future with hope and love. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard, and she knew that it was time. Time to take the puppy out into the world. Time to let it discover what lay beyond the boundaries of the clinic, beyond the safety of the yard. The puppy was ready, and so was she. "Ready to go, little one?" she asked softly, her voice filled with emotion. The puppy stopped, turned its head, and looked at her, its eyes full of trust. It didn't need to say anything. Its very presence was enough. It was ready. They were ready. With a deep breath, the woman opened the gate to the yard, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't hesitate. She walked forward, the puppy trotting beside her, its small body moving with the grace and confidence it had found in its healing. Together, they stepped into the world outside, into the unknown, where anything was possible. The woman's heart raced with the excitement of what lay ahead, but there was no fear, no doubt. Only the knowledge that, whatever came their way, they would face it together. The puppy, once broken and abandoned, had found its place in the world, and in doing so had helped her find hers. They walked side by side, the world unfolding before them like a story waiting to be written. The future was open, full of possibilities, full of life. And in that moment, the woman knew. This was just the beginning. She looked down at the puppy, its tail wagging happily, its eyes full of trust, and smiled. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, the words a promise not just to the puppy, but to herself. And as they walked into the sunset together, she knew that this was the life they were meant to live, a life filled with love, with healing, and with the freedom to run. The clinic, once a sanctuary of sterile white walls and the faint scent of antiseptic, now seemed far less isolating. The quiet that had once filled the space was no longer oppressive, it was peaceful. The woman stood by the window, watching the world outside bathe in the soft, golden light of a late afternoon. The puppy, now fully recovered, was in the yard again, its small body darting through the grass with an exuberance that made her heart flutter. It was a sight she had dreamed of, but seeing it in reality, seeing the puppy so full of life, was something else entirely. The warmth of the sunlight seemed to fill the room, a gentle reminder that the storm had passed, both for the puppy and for her. It felt like a new beginning, but as she stood there, she could still feel the weight of the journey. All the long nights, the fear, the doubt, the unknown. She had given everything for this puppy, poured her heart and soul into its recovery. But in the process, she had unknowingly found something that had been missing in her own life. The puppy's healing had mirrored her own, and in the quiet moments when she watched it run, she saw how far both of them had come. A small, quiet voice inside her whispered, "We did it." The words were simple, but they carried a weight she had never known before. They had both fought for this moment, fought against fear, against doubt, and against the weight of their pasts. And now they were free. The puppy's body had healed, its spirit had been restored, and it had learned to trust again. But more than that, the puppy had given her something she hadn't expected: the ability to trust herself again, to believe in herself, to believe in the love she had to offer. The woman smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. She could see the puppy's growth in every step it took, in every jump, every leap. But it wasn't just about its physical recovery. It was about the trust that had been rebuilt between them, the bond that had formed in the quiet, tender moments when they had both needed each other the most. As she turned away from the window, her gaze landed on the puppy, who was now bounding toward her. Its small legs moved with fluidity, no longer stiff and tentative, but strong and confident. There was a gleam in its eyes that hadn't been there before, a brightness that reflected the transformation it had undergone. The puppy had come so far, and the woman realized with a quiet sense of wonder that so had she. The puppy stopped in front of her, panting happily, its tail wagging with excitement. It seemed to look at her for reassurance, as if waiting for the next command, the next step. She crouched down, her hands reaching out to gently stroke its fur, feeling the warmth and the strength of the creature that had once been so fragile in her arms. There was nothing weak about it now. The puppy had become its own being, whole and strong, with a future that was waiting for it. But there was something more in this moment. As the woman gazed into the puppy's eyes, she understood that this moment, this bond they had formed, wasn't just about rescuing the puppy. It was about healing herself, about learning to trust, to let go, to love without fear. The puppy had helped her face the parts of herself she had buried for so long, the fears, the doubts, the pieces of her heart she had locked away. And in doing so, the puppy had given her the courage to step into the future, to embrace the life that was waiting for both of them. "You've come so far," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll both have." The puppy licked her hand, its eyes full of affection, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. It was just the two of them, bound by a love that had healed them both. The puppy had needed her, yes, but in the process, she had realized how much she needed it, too. She stood, brushing the grass from her pants, and walked toward the door, the puppy trailing behind her. It was a simple moment, but it held more weight than any grand gesture could. She opened the door to the yard, and the sunlight poured in, filling the space with warmth and light. The puppy stood at the threshold for a moment, its small body poised, ready to take that next step. And then, as though it had made up its mind, the puppy took off, its legs moving swiftly and confidently. It ran toward the horizon, toward the open world that lay before it, its tail streaming behind it like a banner of freedom. The woman watched as the puppy raced across the yard, its movements fluid and graceful, every step an affirmation of how far it had come. For a moment, she simply stood there, watching the puppy run with such joy. The fear, the uncertainty, the doubts, they were all gone now, replaced by something pure, something real. The puppy had taken its first real run, and in doing so, had shown her that she, too, could run. She could let go of the past, of the fear that had once held her back, and embrace the future with open arms. The puppy stopped at the edge of the yard and turned back to look at her. Its eyes were bright, its body still and calm. It was waiting for her to catch up, waiting for her to take that final step. The woman smiled, her heart full, and she took off running, her feet moving swiftly across the grass. The puppy bounded beside her, its small body moving with energy and joy, its tail wagging as it raced toward the future. They ran together, side by side, into the unknown. The world, vast and wide, stretched before them, and for the first time in a long while, the woman felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, the promise of a future filled with love, with healing, with endless possibilities. As the sun set behind them, casting a warm golden glow across the world, the woman and the puppy ran together, their steps in perfect sync. And in that moment, she knew. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly free.